Okay, here is lesson 3. We've talked about the Compromise of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which sent the country into an uproar and results in the formation of the Republican Party with a bunch of different parties who have people within them in the North who don't like the idea and concept of slavery expanding into the West, forming into that party. And on the heels of that, within 3 years, we have a very big case, the Dred case in 1857, which is a case that makes a significant statement about the issue of slavery and limitations or no limitations on that court case. Two individuals here, Dred Scott himself and the Chief Justice originally from the slave-owning state of Maryland, Mr. Roger B. Taney. When we look at the midterm elections, the elections between the presidential elections in 1854, the Republican Party gained a whole lot of seats in Congress, and these are the minuses and the losses of seats to those individuals from Democrat and the Democratic seats and the Democratic Party losing positions in the United States Congress. We're going to see here that the party of the North, the Democratic Party is pretty much going to be a party of the South in the future, and more here as we go. The presidential election of 1856 saw the Whigs not really having any political candidate to represent them, and it was falling apart based on Northern Whigs and Southern Whigs with different views on slavery. And our Republican Party selects John C. Fremont, a famous explorer and hero from the Mexican-American War out in California, and they have this slogan, free soil, free speech, and Fremont. Sounds like the Free Soil Party slogan, right? And the Democrats choose a Northerner to gain Northern votes. The Democratic Party we usually associate strongly with being strong in the South, James Buchanan. And he wants to appease or try to make the South happy, and he does that just kind of like Stephen Douglas, the Senator of Illinois, does, and he says popular sovereignty is what we need to use to let the people decide the issue of slavery, and that is what will keep the Union together, and both North and South could agree to that, of course, with the Compromise of 1850 and the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act. And there's a third party here, the American Know-Nothing Party, that is has issues with things that, of course, they were anti-immigration, as we saw, not liking Catholics and the Irish in particular, wanting immigration laws and limiting people coming into the country. Slavery was discussed in their party meetings, and was the key topic of the Kansas-Nebraska Act being repealed. That was rejected in that meeting by primarily Southerners. You might want to go ahead and annotate that there for yourself. And the Northern American Party Know-Nothing people said, we want this gone, because they from the North didn't like the concept of slavery expanding, and so they walk out, and of course they go join the Republican Party. The 1856 election here is one in which we have very strong regional sectional lines, rigid sectional lines developing here, with the Republican Party showing itself as completely a party of the North, nobody in the South supporting that, but yet we have four key states here, that if you did the math and you added those four numbers up, and you took them from Buchanan and gave them to Fremont, he would have easily become president, and the Republican Party in their first attempt at a presidency would have won the presidency, and we might have had the Civil War a little bit earlier. When we get to the election of 1860, those 4 states and California will be red, and Lincoln will win. The South, completely Democrat, popular sovereignty, of course, they like, and we are separating strongly along political party lines. Popular sovereignty, the idea that each state or territory should decide on the issue of slavery independently and on their own. In particular, this your home learning should have been completing the graphic organizer. It doesn't quite look like this, but make sure you get that done and complete the graphic organizer on the Dred Scott case that we read and talked about in class. Dred Scott case itself, Dred Scott was a slave living in Missouri with his owner, a military doctor, traveling through various territorial states in the 1830s. Was in Illinois and then Wisconsin Territory, both of them having slavery and banned and being free territories. When he returned to Missouri several years later, his owner died, and he then became the property of the owner's wife. And some anti-slavery people, lawyers, legal representatives of the abolitionist movement said you should sue for your freedom based on the fact that you were in that particular free territory and free state. And it goes to the Supreme Court after some state court cases, and actually a court case in Missouri where he was wins the case, and it's appealed, and it goes to the Supreme Court on that basis. And at the Supreme Court, we have the Chief Justice Roger Taney, who's from Maryland, growing up in a slave family, who is giving a very significant ruling here. He rules that Scott is still a slave. He's not a citizen, and thus, since he's not a citizen, he shouldn't even be in a federal court to sue. Even if he was a citizen of a state, according to a state law, that didn't, in his mind, make him a citizen of the United States. And residence has no impact on citizenship. Slaves are property, and that is that. But he goes quite a few steps further. He says, also, the Fifth Amendment kind of applies here, and the only way I can take property away from somebody is if there's been some sort of a law that's been broken and some sort of due process of law involved with that, and that hasn't happened here. But the big thing, you really want to star this, the big thing that blows up the Missouri Compromise, that blows up every other compromise that's been made on slavery, he said that this idea that Congress can prohibit or put any limit or regulation on slavery anywhere, like the Missouri Compromise, is unconstitutional. The Constitution specifically protects slaves as property, and it does nothing, the federal government and the Constitution does nothing to limit any property at all, and slavery should be no different. And so thus, even the concept of popular sovereignty and people being able to vote against slavery and put limits on slavery at the state or territory level is not constitutional. And this throws the North into a complete tizzy. And of course, Southerners love this because it's even better than popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty allowed the possibility that slavery could be voted out of a territory or a state. And thus, nothing can be legally stopping slavery and the spread of it. So the very formation and the idea and the central idea of the Republican Party, which was to limit the spread of slavery, itself is unconstitutional. It's an unconstitutional party. And so Republicans and anti-slavery groups call it a wicked and false judgment, the greatest crime ever committed in a court. Scott gets his freedom for a few months before he dies. 1858 is a year of election for the re-election for the senator of Illinois. One of the senators, Stephen Douglas, the little giant we talked about before, wants to be a presidential candidate, will be in 1860 for the Democratic Party. He is going to run against a relatively unknown Abraham Lincoln, even though Abraham Lincoln had served in the U.S. House of Representatives several years before representing Illinois as a Whig. Lincoln is challenging for that position. And if you remember, Douglas is very much a popular sovereignty guy. That's what he promoted, keep Southerners happy, even though he was pushing for a transcontinental railroad in the North. And even though he disliked slavery, he said, this is how we have to decide things to keep the Union together, and this is democracy at its greatest, its best, its ultimate. Lincoln, not a lot of education, educated basically on his own, none of the education of any other political major leader at that point in time at all. I believe that slavery is a moral wrong, but yet he saw no easy way to end it where it existed. And so he never really talked about abolitionism, promoted that idea with the American Colonization Society to go and try to send them to Liberia, but eventually saw it was not practical. But very much like, again, as a Republican, as a new Republican, member of the Republican Party, believed that we cannot allow the spread of slavery. And so he asks and challenges Douglas to a series of debates going around the state of Illinois. And they know each other very well from the legal circuit as lawyers traveling around the state of Illinois in their particular part of Illinois, hearing and arguing cases for people. He very much brought about this question that is now brought with the ruling in Dred Scott and poses it to Douglas in this series of debate. And he says, well, could a people of territory legally exclude slavery before becoming a state, referencing the Dred Scott decision and people basically being, through election processes, being able to vote it? And Douglas replied yes, by refusing to pass laws protecting slaveholders' rights. This became known as the Freeport Doctrine because it was set at Freeport, Illinois. And this makes Southerners unhappy because they don't like this idea that he is supporting yet the popular sovereignty. They now like much better the Dred Scott case ruling, which is the why answer to our why question here. And It's also the set of debates where Lincoln said a house cannot stand divided amongst itself, has to choose to be one thing or another. So here's the Freeport Doctrine, the idea that slavery could be excluded by refusing to pass laws protecting slaveholders' rights. It's basically popular sovereignty. And so this is going to hurt him in the election of 1860. Douglas also claimed, though, Lincoln wants some African Americans fully equal to whites. But Lincoln said, I do not believe that they're fully equal to whites. But he said, in the right to eat the bread which his own hand earns, to be able to earn it equally as a free worker, he is my equal, and the equal of Douglas, and the equal of every living man. The real problem is between those that think slavery is wrong and those that don't. The Republican Party think it wrong. This election is one in which Lincoln loses, but he actually wins a great national reputation. Through all the debates and all the speeches he makes, he is recognized as a very, very clear thinker, talking in very simple terms that everybody can understand, a very complicated issue, and he is moved up in the ranks of the Republican Party significantly. Not the front runner for the presidency yet, but he is definitely in the top layers of the Republican Party with this. And Douglas wins the election. Southerners, though, through this series of debates were pretty widely published, recognize that this Republican Party and what Lincoln is talking about is a very significant threat, and they're feeling even a little bit more threatened than they had in the past. And when you look at the state of Illinois, you can see the Democrats here, kind of like we talked about before, a party of the South, party of Jefferson and Jackson here at liberties and laissez-faire, small government, let the people live as they please, that kind of thing, being strong in the southern counties here. The Whigs still kind of trying to win some power in the state of Illinois here, having some control here. But as you move north, look how we move into the Republican land and the limitation ideas of slavery that the Republicans have, getting rid of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This is basically the layers of what our entire country looks like as you move from north to south. And remember that this is Kentucky down here, and slavery right across the Ohio River, which is right here. And so this election of Illinois here, this in 1858, is a reflection of what the country really looks like if you look at it from north to south, and even throughout the South in different layers and different intensities of thinking about slavery here with that. 1859 is a huge year, another big event involving John Brown, who had hacked pieces with his son some what they thought were some pro-slave people at Pottawatomie Creek, Kansas, and Bleeding, Kansas. They run from Kansas, and they, over the next couple of years, hatch a plan to end slavery, and their target is a place called Harpers, Ferry, Virginia. Virginia is actually, at this time in 1859, completely Virginia. It's not West Virginia yet. This will be chopped out during the Civil War as it's going on and become West Virginia, because these are Union people and they never really secede from the Union. And his idea is to basically break into a federal arsenal here that has all kinds of weapons and spread them out amongst the slaves, tell them to run into the countryside, spread the word, arm other slaves, tell them to kill their masters and rise up in violence, and we will purge the land with blood and purge the land of slavery at the same time as we do that. This is the only way in his mind that this can be done. He feels himself kind of like an agent of God in a sense as well, and that this is his place and his role in life after a life of quite a bit of failure, and that this is going to just spread out from into the South. This is how it looks. From the bluffs of the Potomac River that runs to Washington, D.C. eventually. You got 3 states today from each of these, this vantage point here, 1, 2, and 3, West Virginia, Virginia, and Maryland, as you can kind of see here. And it's with that river that he would be able to, move into the interior of the country and support and promote this slave rebellion. It turns into a great big disaster. I'm going to upload this video for you here called The Meteor. I'll give you the link for it. Make sure you watch it. It gives all the details about that John Brown event and the violence and some significant people that were there. It's very eye-opening about how people responded to it and how the South responded to it. And this painting kind of reflects how John Brown was portrayed after that. When he's really kind of considered to be a guy that helps bring about the Civil War. He actually kind of predicted that the Civil War would happen, and that the only way we can get rid of slavery is through blood. A very strongly religious guy. You can see here he's kind of depicted kind of like a Moses guy, spreading his arms, kind of be parting the sea in a sense, willing to use violence to achieve his goals, with the Bible on the other hand, representing kind of a Moses here, like Exodus in the book of Exodus, leading the enslaved Jewish people out of Egypt here. He's kind of doing the same for through his actions for the slaves, and bringing about the Civil War with the North and the South here representing that. So the impact of Harper's Ferry is that really we have a major defeat for him in this. The citizens rise up against him, that he didn't really expect that to happen. Federal troops show up. They get surrounded in this little building here, which you can go still see. He's put on trial, convicted of treason, and he's hung. In the North, most people denounce him as a terrorist, and he can't try to get change in this manner. It's just not okay in a democracy. Those who are anti-slave or abolitionists call him a martyr. Finally, somebody's willing to put his life on the line to save others and to do something about this issue of slavery. The abolitionist cause is maybe kind of rallied with that a little bit. In the South, Southerners all of a sudden start thinking and feel like there's a whole bunch of other John Browns up there, and there's a conspiracy and a plot to destabilize the South through this kind of slave uprising and slave revolt. And so things are incredibly on edge with this, and with this, Southern militias throughout the state begin getting more organized just prior to the Civil War, which is going to start basically here in 1861, after the election of 1860, with Abraham Lincoln becoming our president, and a Republican president at that. Another video clip to look at that's going to review the last couple lessons is A House Divided. Make sure you watch that as well. And here is basically the summary for your essential question that you could do some writing and summarization in your notebook for. That is it, and good night.